stuff. So, right, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name's Dave Rees. I'm the managing partner at Convergence. Great to have you all with us. Really looking forward to deep diving into AI this morning and understanding what the state of play is within New Zealand businesses, particularly across supply chain, across operations, and within retail and consumer goods businesses, among others. Great to have Gavin Sharkey here from Kōwhai AI. How are you doing this morning, Gavin?
Really good, Dave. Yourself?
Yeah, pretty good, pretty good. You're down in Wellington, I'm up in Auckland. What's the day like down there?
Yeah, pretty good. Pretty good. The weather's not bad. Up bright and early this morning, and it was raining as I left Auckland, and sunny as I arrived in Wellington. So I'm pretty stoked about that, which is good.
Sounds like a fair exchange.
Yeah, long may it last.
For anyone who hasn't come across Convergence before, I'll just give you a brief snapshot before we get into it. So we describe ourselves as a specialist search firm. We help companies to find and select talent for leadership roles, but also for specialist positions. And that runs quite a wide gamut. So we recruit everything from chief financial officers through to specialist data science roles, marketing roles for consumer goods companies. We do a lot in supply chain and operations. So really a broad variety. And the reason that it's pretty broad is that we've got a team of consultants who are all long-standing specialists in particular functional disciplines. So mostly companies engage us where they know they're going to have a hard time accessing the caliber of talent they want, particularly through conventional ways like advertising. They know we understand the roles they're trying to fill, and we've got the network to go beyond people that are just actively looking for a new job and really extend that reach into great people that you simply can't access through advertising alone. So that's a little bit about us, but what we're actually here to talk about today is all things AI, particularly as it relates to operations and supply chains in retail, FMCG and logistics. Delighted to have Gavin Sharkey with us. Gavin's the Managing Director at Kōwhai AI. As you might imagine, he's got an extensive background in technology. He's held numerous senior leadership roles, including GM Technology at Spark, Head of Technology at Suntory. And just before co-founding Kōwhai AI, he was the Director of AI and Automation for Suntory across Asia Pac. So we're going to dig into as many topics as we can for the next 45 minutes, and then we'll move into a Q&A before we finish up. But please, if you can, use the chat function, if nothing else, as a placeholder for your questions along the way. We'll try and sort of get into them and weave them in if we can, but if nothing else, we'll come back to it. So without any further ado, keen to get into it. Gavin, maybe we can just kick off by hearing a little bit about your personal journey, career-wise, and for anyone unfamiliar with Kōwhai, perhaps give us a bit of a background on the business and the origin story.
Sure, yeah. Thanks, Dave, and great to be here. Yeah, so as you mentioned, my background's heavily focused through IT professional services kind of companies, and then more recently in FMCG, so a bit of a wide gambit across there. As you mentioned, most recent role I had was the regional director for AI and automation at Suntory Beverage and Food APAC. Really, Dave, in that role, I came to realize just how far behind we are here in New Zealand when it comes to using some of this now very accessible kind of technology, which can use to unlock incremental or transformational level value depending on how you use it. And that's kind of where Kōwhai was born, to be honest. So that's what we're all about, is how do we focus on narrowing that gap that you and I often talk about, actually, of the large gaping gap that we have here in productivity in New Zealand. So as such, at Kōwhai, we really kind of do two things. We apply it using AI in process automation. We'll talk a little bit about some of the examples later on, I'm sure. And then using AI in data analytics to really get some insights. And actually, in fact, where the real magic comes is when you combine those two things together.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, for a lot of companies, they're either at the start of this journey or they're considering things. You guys are in the thick of the action, working with companies who I presume are early adopters, almost sort of by definition. Talk us through the current state of play. Like, how are businesses thinking about AI? Where's adoption at, would you say?
It's a great question. It's very different depending on who you talk to. Some companies are in there testing and learning, which is fantastic. They know that they need to get ahead of this and kind of learn what it's about and seeing how it'll apply in certain things now or in the future. So we're doing a lot of proof of concepts with companies like that, which is awesome. A lot of curiosity. Everyone's really keen to have a chat and understand what's going on, and probably an element of trying to understand what other businesses are doing as well, of course, which is understandable. a lot of people are kind of at the side of things where they may have done a bit around their digital strategy and are now looking at their data strategy and how AI kind of comes into that. And then you have the few that just are literally just running at it and going, we want to do a use case, let's just go in and do it, sort of thing. So it's very, so some are more on the strategic end of it and being a bit more test and learn and put some governance around stuff. Some are more around the, well, let's just get in and start doing something. And then some are just kind of a bit more just wanting to hear about it and kind of just see what everybody else does first, sort of thing. I guess the other thing as well is people that we're talking to tend to kind of, you have a lot of inefficiencies. So they're quite curious to understand how they might help there. Or there's a fear of remaining relevant is the other thing that would generally spark some of our conversations.
Is that a sort of is there a single right way, or is it a horses for courses type approach, just depending on kind of organizational sort of dynamics of one type or another?
I would say a combination of the two is probably somewhere about right. Like there is some things that you can jump in and start doing right away without having to have you know, AI governance and data governance out the wazoo. But there are certainly some things that you cannot. So it's quite good to have a bit of a, well, actually, here's a bit of a tactical roadmap of stuff that we can do now and derive value from, while using some of that stuff to potentially gather data points and stuff that we can use later to then get into more of the more in-depth deep model type stuff.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, that's that sort of test and learn. I think you use that phrase. I think that would work, you know, quite well, almost like a sandbox mentality where, okay, let's experiment over here while we're maybe putting together a sort of a deeper enterprise-wide strategy.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I think the key thing, certainly with businesses that we talk to, is they all want to know what other companies are doing in the space and how companies are actually using AI. I think they often have an idea of use cases, they can see the potential, but perhaps keen to sort of get you to walk through specific examples, like what are you seeing in terms of projects and use cases, case studies out there?
Sure. Yeah. So one of the most common thing that we're seeing is surprisingly, or not surprisingly, I should say, is around demand forecasting, especially if anyone in FMCG that's running an S&OP type process. So they might have a typical process today that's often done on spreadsheets that's hit its limit. Is how can we look at running some models across their demand to see if we can get better insights, and that could be through, you know, looking at volume for putting into your factory or something like that. Or we've actually had it in agriculture as well, as where we're using it to try and understand when the optimal time to harvest a crop might be, that kind of thing. That's more in the data space. In the factories, we're seeing things like predictive maintenance. So capturing the data points to try and understand when when something might go out of spec, and that could be, you know, an element on the line, or it could be something that's feeding into process manufacturing, but it's basically an anomaly detection. So if we have all this data point, when we start seeing something going out of a general spec and setting off an alarm, especially useful in, I guess, New Zealand businesses that have older technology and don't necessarily have the funding to have that in-process stuff through their SCADA systems or MES. You can kind of do some of this stuff to the side while you're planning towards that, or even just maintain it effectively. And the other pieces we're seeing is, I would say, away from the data side of things, is what we're calling the kind of the surround strategy. So it's using some of the intelligent automation suites that are available now to augment the capability that's in your ERP system or your MRP system or CRM, depending on what you're running. So imagining things like pulling, I guess, extending functionality from your core off to the edge, and then using technology like AI and all the rest of it to augment the process before it puts the answer back in again. Real common things like plant maintenance for manufacturing, stock movements in warehouses is quite a common one as well. The other piece is probably around like where you have a lot of paper. So again, I'll use manufacturing as an example. We see this quite often. A check sheet process for manufacturing is generally, everyone you speak to is generally a paper process. You can start by actually automating that through simply taking a photo of it to gather together all of the various data points, and that's stored digitally in the back end as a starting point before you start implementing your MES or whatever else way you kind of want to go down. All those things ultimately can lead to better OEE measurement and those kind of things. If we look at retail and other things, I think there's quite a few retail people on the call as well. We're seeing a lot around the use of POS and loyalty data, which is nothing new, but probably more of what you're doing with it. So people have been using this data for as long as I can remember, really driving revenue growth management, checking for price and volume and market and that kind of thing. we're seeing things now where people are using it to match SKUs with competitors using AI, and then potentially even doing stuff like this is quite a clever one actually that we came across recently, is using SEO to then, as in search engine optimization in Google and that kind of thing. So when people are searching for competitor products, it brings up their product because they've got the SEO driven that way. Quite a very clever kind of way of looking at it. It's slightly different. A lot of the common ones then these are not necessarily new. They've been around for a number of years, but things like planogram adherence, ensuring that you're basically optimizing that rep or the merchandiser's time in store as quickly as possible. So they're optimizing their 6 or 7 minutes they have to spend in there. So anything you can do to shave off time, whether it's pre-populating their cart. So when they're taking their order, they've pretty much got a pre-populated thing there. Looking at core range to seeing actually if the client doesn't have these things, let's talk about these pieces. Planogram adherence, as I mentioned, ensuring that that's all lining up to what the standard is. And yeah, really anything that you can do to optimize their time in store. Back office stuff, as I mentioned, the whole surround strategy of your ERP and extending the core functionality. There is a plethora of things you can do in back office finance, as you can probably imagine. Things like reconciliation and banking, it's a really common one. Things like sales order optimization or even automation, picking up a PDF from an email, pulling out all the data points out of that, and then checking to see if the stock's if it's in stock, for example, and then putting it through to someone in sales operations to place the order. So lots of different examples, all using very similar models, similar technology, but just applied a little bit differently.
Yeah, is it much the same sort of technology that's underlying it in terms of you're saying using the same models? But I'm just thinking from a low-hanging fruit point of view, if you're somebody that's starting out on this journey, among that range of examples that you've given, are there some that's just like an easier way to get started, would be handy to understand, versus what is it the sort of the more complex sort of leading edge end of that spectrum?
Sure. So on the easy side, anything where you're doing reconciliation and that kind of stuff is very, very toe in the water. It's very, very easy. You're using fairly simple kind of fuzzy logic models to compare data sets based on business rules. It's a step ahead of what RPA technology kind of gave us 20 years ago, sort of thing. It's just that it's got a lot more I guess brain power in terms of what to do when something that comes up that's an anomaly sort of thing. On the other end of the spectrum is when you start looking at anything that's deep diving in data, that gets a little bit more difficult because you need to have your data in the good space. You need to really be clear about what you want. We have a lot of scenarios where you go into an engagement with this and you end up kind of over here, which is great, by the way, in some ways as well, especially in test and learn. But people kind of think, oh, we can just jump into this one right away, but actually you probably shouldn't. For this one, we need to look at your data a bit better. Like demand forecasting is probably in the middle because you'll tend to have your demand, your demand data quite in good shape. But there's other points that you may not be, and we may need to actually put in a way to gather that data in the first instance before we can start kind of doing models and kind of getting any value out of it.
Yeah, interesting. So there's like a sort of an organizational preparedness before you can start implementing this sort of stuff. And so when you're going in and looking at a business, and how are you thinking about it? How are you advising that? What sort of shape do things need to be in before you can start sort of attacking those sort of higher order things?
It depends, as I said. So you kind of go into anybody, you'll generally hear one of two things. One is our data strategy is brilliant and it's humming and it's great. Or we actually don't have any data strategy, and they're probably both wrong, to be honest. So really, you kind of have to go in and you have to talk to people that are doing the stuff day in, day out, understand how they're doing it, and actually then realize, okay, so of these use cases, where is the biggest impact? And are we looking for cost optimization in terms of people's time, or are we looking for top line growth and more transformational, which is generally something we could definitely consult with, but you're going to get that real value of having that vision internally and then working with someone like us to really pull the pieces together, sort of thing. So it just kind of varies. We've got engagements that start off with, okay, we're going to go far and wide. We're going to do a full strategy view. We're going to compare it against this whole framework and figure out where you are in terms of your data, in terms of cultural adoption, in terms of your strategy over here, technology strategy, so on and so forth. Give you a good baseline across all those 20 data points, figure out where you are today and where you want to be in the next kind of 3 to 5 years, and give you a roadmap. very strategic and all the rest of it, or we can go into an area and go into back office finance where we know there's going to be a whole bunch of opportunity, work with them for a period of time and actually just start firing out the use cases for that specific area, and then start showing that value back quickly as possible, sort of thing. So it can kind of go both ways.
Yeah, I see. Question coming through. Do you see key risks or key points of distinction between AI for back office versus customer facing functionality?
Yes and no. I mean, it's effectively the same technology that you're facing inwards and outwards. It depends on how you use it. Really, do you want to go fully autonomous with something that's customer facing? I would say no, not yet. Can you have something there that's someone can use to save some time? Like, for example, getting through a bit of triage for your customer support, where a human might have to ask all those questions. Why not an agent doing that at the moment? You know, it can have the same kind of conversational viewpoints as a person, and then you get to the point of actually, okay, now I can't help you anymore. Put you onto an informed human that knows exactly what you're after, sort of thing. And what we're finding anyways, or half of these front office people are using the same agent as their customers are to answer the questions, because it's getting smarter and smarter with all of the training that it's getting. So it just depends on, you know, how you use it and where you decide to draw the line between where you hand over from automation to the human.
Yeah, that customer facing element reminds me of that Air Canada example where the chatbot was throwing out deals that it really shouldn't have been, and I think the court case decided that actually they had to stick with what the chatbot had offered. So this certainly is not without risk by the sound of things.
That's it. Yeah, there's there's accountability for this stuff, so you got to be aware of it.
There's a question here about, does SAP integrate with AI? But I guess it's worth touching on, any sort of large ERP system. Do they have their own AI sort of modules to them now, or is that are you sort of strapping on a sort of a third-party product to run over the top of it? How is that working?
Both. So SAP have released quite a bit of AI technology in the last number of years through their S/4HANA platform. I know they've got embedded AI now in their S/4HANA cloud, and then they have their version of intelligent automation sitting in their BTP platform, which is their basically their cloud integration suite. So there is SAP specific stuff for that. However, they also support the Microsoft surround strategy. So if you have Office 365 as an example, you've got access to Microsoft Power Platform. So if you're familiar with Power BI, it's a similar kind of suite. It just sits below it. That actually can integrate to, it's got 1,400 native connectors as an example, one of which can connect into SAP. Of course, if you are, doing that, there's licensing implications and that kind of stuff you need to be aware of. But generally, if you have your digital access license, you can do that sort of stuff. So yeah, you absolutely can, and it just depends on what your enterprise architecture looks like and that kind of thing.
Sure. Obviously, from an investment point of view, all organisations have finite resources. Everyone wants to make sure that they're allocating those effectively. So, where are you seeing the best sort of bang for buck? Which areas do you see AI having the most impact in? And I guess that impact can be measured in a number of different ways. But where are you seeing companies sort of extract the most value?
I think the immediate return is what's been keeping people interested, I think, Dave. So any of those examples that I talk about that are really rinse and repeat that you can show that people have done, like the bank reconciliation stuff, anything in back office, front office automation, these kind of things that are, I say easy to implement. It's relatively easy compared to other things. Is probably what I mean there. But you can write a business case across that kind of stuff quite quickly, and you're not talking years to implement. You're talking a matter of weeks in the most instances. So that's kind of where you really get your initial bang for buck. You do have some of the visionaries out there which are amazing to talk to, of course, and they have these great ideas of flying, drones around things and capturing great big data points, and eventually will get to a point of saving them millions of dollars. But you'll have to spend probably a little bit to get there as well. So there's a bit of consulting around. Great idea, fantastic, you can get there, but have you got 3 years? So that's kind of what you're looking at, and to get to that point as well, we're talking about sitting with your team for a long period of time, showing them how to handle data, how to label it, what to do with it, all that kind of good stuff. So you do have this balance between people get really excited about it, and you try not to hinder the excitement by scaring with a 3-year project, but at the same time going, That's great, but have you thought about looking at something over here in the first instance so you can prove it, show it back to your board, whatever, or while you work towards something like this? So it kind of just varies really in that sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. A question here about the level of improvement in master data quality. What level of improvement in master data quality have you managed to achieve, both in normalizing aspects like brand, dimension, etc., but also in creating specific or free-form product groupings?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's a bit like anything else. If anyone says they've got good master data, they're also a liar. But anyway, yeah, look, it's interesting in the back office finance side of things. So the intelligent automation, we've used a similar fuzzy logic model that I talked about with that reconciliation piece for exactly that, for master data management, and real simple stuff. It's amazing what you can actually do for your support organization by just putting in some of these checks and balances. So for example, what we did on a daily basis was exporting the material master database and just running a fuzzy logic model across it just to see if somebody put in something that's similar to something else, and therefore you got a duplicate, which inevitably is going to end up with either stopping the line or stopping a sale or stopping a payment somewhere along the way. So you can absolutely put some of these stuff around that. Now there's a plethora of data management tool sets out there and data quality governance tools. So you kind of want to just make sure that you're balancing between what you're implementing with those suite of tools versus to the side in the automation AI suite. I wouldn't necessarily say that you should throw this out and start just doing your AI across the edge. There's tools that do a very good job of this and do a lot of the orchestration very well. And that's still in my opinion anyway, a very clear data management strategy.
No, just coming back to something you mentioned right at the start, which is the sort of the difference between what you're seeing internationally in terms of the AI, the progress, and then what you see in New Zealand. We've got a question here, in terms of offshore examples, specifically in logistics and supply chain industries. Like what is the sort of the leading edge or cutting edge offshore versus what you're seeing in New Zealand?
It's interesting. So I think what we find offshore, like our biggest challenge here in New Zealand, and we ran this event with Advanced Manufacturing Aotearoa back in July, and it was the overwhelming response when I asked them saying, what is your biggest challenge? And it was freight, which is not surprising given where we are and all the rest of it. And actually, we're working on a use case around how can we help New Zealand manufacturers get better visibility of the various freight options globally. That's probably one of the biggest things, where if you look overseas, they tend to have a lot of the integration with a lot of the big players in that space, and do have a lot of the real-time insights in some of those areas. And a lot of it's led at a country level, which we're not doing in New Zealand. So in that side of things, very much on the freight side of things is where I would see our biggest challenge here, and probably where it's been solved overseas.
Yeah, interesting. Just coming back to implementation, I mean, no doubt this stuff isn't always a smooth road. Just for people that are getting started on this journey versus people that have been through and sort of maybe fallen into some of those bear traps, what are the typical challenges that you see organizations grappling with? Like where are the sort of the common errors or mistakes, and how can companies that are just starting out on this sort of mitigate that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's a lot around awareness and education that needs to be done. And actually, interestingly, in the EU this week, they've announced a regulation where AI literacy is now like a mandated prerequisite for any AI system that you deploy, which means you have to have anybody in the organization that's using it up to a certain level of understanding what AI is and isn't. So that's quite a shift, and you can kind of see. Again, it kind of highlights where we are in terms of some of this stuff, but and literacy is different to awareness, right? So it's almost like we need to get the awareness piece through and figuring out what it isn't, and how you apply it to business. And then the literacy piece is actually, and then how do you implement it so that it's done with the right motives, with the right kind of principles and all the rest of it, so that it's accessible, it's fair, all that kind of good stuff. So there's elements of that. There's lots of conversation around governance as well, Dave, and that's probably one of my bugbears, to be honest, where I think governance is fantastic and you can't get away from it and it's needed, but you don't necessarily have to have the end state of governance in play before you start testing and learning on some of these things. So we can't use it as a crutch to kind of go, well, we're not doing it because governance, la la la. I think that's probably another thing that we're seeing a lot. The other piece as well is probably seen as more of a want than a need in the boardroom, I would say. Like in conversations we have, yes, it's beginning to kind of come onto plans and stuff like that, but it's not kind of coming through as, let's just review our current plan with an AI mindset, and therefore what would we do differently if we knew that we could access some of these tools. It's kind of almost coming in as a separate piece, which is probably wrong in my mindset. And then it's the big two, the usual other two things that kind of really hurt any kind of technology project, which is ownership. Who owns it? IT look at the business look at IT. It's not an IT project in my mind. IT are very important in it because, of course, someone's got to make sure that it is done the right way, adhering to architecture and all the rest of it. And then the last challenge, of course, is data. So, when you go into some of these scenarios, especially in the data space or the data intelligence space, which I mean, people are thinking they're in a good space sometimes, and it might look that way to us even as well. And then you get into it and you're like, no, it's not quite there. You're going to need to do all these different things before we can do anything of worth.
Yeah, interesting. And so just coming back to the governance side for a moment, I imagine that's kind of a response that a lot of people will get when they're trying to sort of move on AI projects as well. We haven't got the necessary governance in place. So what do you see as sort of a necessary standard versus, and maybe just going a little bit too far in terms of the governance? What's necessary versus unnecessary?
Yeah, and look, and it's horses for courses, right? I mean, if you're, I know, for example, like if you look at someone like Fonterra, they've got a whole AI council, and the chair of it is actually one of the guys that runs supply chain effectively, which is, in my mind, completely appropriate sort of thing. So you have that kind of model on one end of the spectrum. On the other end of it, I mean, if you have, you'll already have some level of governance across how you spend money and how you do projects effectively. You can just apply a similar thing to these things. It's asking the same questions, the right questions, probably maybe getting advice on what those questions are to ensure that you are aware of what these things are and how they might impact your people, your processes, your customers, and those kind of things. So I think there's, and I've always been a believer in just enough governance, to be honest. Yeah, goes back to my TOGAF days, seeing what governance out the wazoo looks like when it comes to enterprise architecture, and you can die a death with this stuff, but just enough governance is really kind of where it needs to be. So, is it affecting your people? Is it going to affect your customers? Is it going to affect your top line, bottom line, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, is there any guidance? I mean, you're helping leaders to get these projects across the line. So, is there any sort of guidance in how people sort of steer this to find success in terms of getting sign off?
Absolutely, yeah, and it's back to that kind of, I guess, being curious, like seek to understand. Unfortunately, there's a lot of information on AI out there that's, I'd say, it's either marketware or it's designed to scare. It's kind of interesting, so it's hard to kind of cut through some of that stuff sometimes, which we know we do on a daily basis when we're talking to our clients. So that's quite difficult for business leaders to probably get through some of that stuff. So it's probably, seek to understand, speak to people like us, anybody in your network or whatever else that's across this stuff to really learn the spaces. Like I've seen some leaders adopt it like at the rate of naught, especially in R&D and stuff like that, and it's almost scary how quickly they adopt it and understand so much about it, because these people obviously are research addicts, so it's awesome. They're awesome to talk to. And if you got something like that in your organization, just put them front and center and just learn from them. The other warning I would say is, you're going to have somebody knock on your door every 5 minutes trying to sell you an AI tool. And like every tool today's got AI in it, let's be honest, right? So, we've got to get away from calling everything AI, which is quite annoying these days. But anyway, but there's a big danger in like falling into the trap of like buying many AI tools, and then you just end up with sprawl. So we've got to kind of just, as you're going through these projects and initiatives, just balance between what you do yourself and what you buy, sort of thing. So just be very mindful that if you buy too many, you're going to end up in a bit of a rut. If you build too much yourself, you're going to end up in a bit of a rut too. So you've got to get that balance exactly right.
Yeah, I guess part of the challenge is that, as you say, everything's got an AI component now, and it's difficult for the layman to know exactly what sort of constitutes AI and what doesn't. And the sort of inherent nature of it is as a bit of a black box, and you know, at the very least, it's technical and often beyond the layman's understanding of sort of technical stuff. So, is there any sort of common sort of heuristics or ways that we can determine what is a genuine AI tool and what is not, or is it just too challenging to know without expert advice?
I would probably the quick litmus test would be when they say it's an AI tool, find out what does that actually mean. Is it using machine learning models? Is it got deep learning in there, or is it just literally got a chatbot in the front of it? Because a lot of people are just slapping a chatbot into something and saying it's got AI, and it's not. Yes, it does. It does. Of course, it does. But it's just using an OpenAI similar model to extract information from their help file sort of thing, and that doesn't necessarily make it an AI product. So I think just you should never really look at things product first anyway. You should look at what your process or your problem you're trying to solve, and then figuring out what's the best way to do that in the most efficient way, and then you look at the tool sets that can do it effectively. So just don't put on your magpie hat and look at the shiny things, but like remember your training basically, and go into your requirements and look a bit bottom up, I think, and then just see what's out there to match. So just take your time in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. A question here on the freight side, where do you see the key areas of opportunity? Do you see the lack of uptake being driven by a lack of awareness of the capability that these tools can bring, or more structural barriers?
A little bit from all the columns, I would say. Like it's notoriously difficult to implement some of these things, or any tool in any supply chain, right? Because I used to kind of joke with my colleagues saying it's easy to put stuff into commercial because like the worker doesn't. You put it into supply chain, it doesn't work. You've basically destroyed the business. So it's very, very difficult to test some of these stuff in production. So I think where these tools come in quite useful is you don't necessarily put it in line in your process, but put it to inform your process. So you build it to the side. So if you think about, we talked about, let's say logistics, we'll go with like route optimization. A lot of applications will claim to have that these days. Probably not a massive issue in New Zealand, if I'm honest, because our roads are fairly straightforward. But as an example, you may decide to kind of pull something off to the side, pull your data out of that, do modeling or scenario planning, and then inform your process by putting the answer back in. That's a much better way of doing these kind of things in that sense. So that's what these tools generally allow.
Interesting. Okay. I mean, just coming back to the use cases, you mentioned about demand forecasting, for example. Could you maybe go a little bit more granular on that, just to sort of walk us through exactly, what benefits can we get beyond sort of traditional ways of sort of demand planning and forecasting?
Yeah. So if we go with kind of traditional demand forecasting, let's say you've got X number of years of data, you're probably going to be able to kind of crunch through a portion of that in your Excel workbook or whatever else you're doing. In essence, with like running your machine learning models across this stuff allows you to run it in the cloud, which means you're running it on effectively compute that you can expand with, which means that you can crunch through data in a much quicker way. So you're talking about a matter of minutes instead of, could be hours or days, depending on and you'll never get there in Excel anyway, sort of thing. So what it gives you is you can actually get down to almost a SKU level, as long as you got enough data points to run your granular demand forecast across each of these, as well as your top end hierarchy. You can then kind of play with, and this is what they call fine tuning. You can play with what your parameters are in that model. So let's say if you want more certainty, but you don't mind a little bit less, let's say if you wanted 80% accuracy, but more certainty, you can kind of play around the model to go, well, actually, my number is going to be closer to this. But if you're looking for more trending, you can change it the other way, where you go, well, actually, no, I need it to be closer to 95% certain. So I don't mind it being a higher way, because I just want to understand trend and those kind of things. So yeah, you would typically decide. I mean, you wouldn't necessarily do it on revenue like you would in demand forecast anyway. You'd pick whatever your FMCG, you're probably looking at liters or volumes and that kind of stuff. You can crunch as many years data as you want. You can start looking at things like, okay, well, let's pull in things like weather. Do we see an impact when we have a different level of rainfall? So we've done models on that. You can expand it out to look at things like macro scenarios. OCR is one that people are talking about to us all the time. Can we start modeling some of that stuff in? Because, you know, if we're forecasting down, can we look at anything that could stimulate that? So you still have your traditional demand forecast time series type stuff coming through, but then you start thinking about, well, what else can I look at to try to fine tune what that number might be? I think the pitfall here as well is people kind of assume, oh, AI will give me the number. AI won't never give you the number. So you're only going to get a mathematical answer based on the equation that you use, and you still need to use it to inform the decision that you make, sort of thing. And you can use other models like weather, I mentioned, to help inform the decision even further. But, you know, don't expect it to go, you must make 15 of these and 12 of these and all the rest of it, sort of thing. And I think people actually think that's what it will do, and I might get there, but it's not there yet.
Yeah, interesting. So we're still talking about a range at a 80% accuracy level or whatever it ends up being. Yeah.
I should be careful for that, because yes, you could go out and build a deep learning model today, and that would give you the answer. But the reality is you're not going to have the money to do that, and nobody is. So we're still using the demand forecasting ML type stuff to get to a more feasible approach.
Yeah, but with the ability to kind of build a richer picture, but bringing in these other variables, sort of, yeah.
Exactly right. So you could kind of think of like, then, you know, I mentioned at the very beginning where the magic is when you start bringing all this stuff together. You might have, let's say you're a planner in your planning team. You're getting your demand feed through from your data warehouse that you built to give you this forecast. You might decide to, okay, so it's saying to do these number of SKUs across these lines, all the rest of it. That's cool. You might change all of the numbers according to whatever you think, but then you might start getting feeds from, let's say, like your weather model comes in and it says, we've noticed typically that when it's sunnier on these days that we're seeing an uplift in these things. So the planner, not the AI, then might decide, based on that information, I might actually up a few of these to see if that's going to get to a closer view. And then, of course, the important thing is the backflush of the information back into the model so it can retrain and say, well, we did this, what happened? We did this, what happened? Therefore, you know, we've got
learning in real time. Yeah, interesting. And so I guess it's sort of a downstream from that. You mentioned about warehouse operation and automating things like stock reordering and stock movements. Could you give, again, just go into a bit more detail and depth on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, this is probably back more to the surround strategy. So where you've got your like warehouse management systems can be quite cumbersome traditionally, because, you know, again, they're very audit driven, very process driven. Lots of screens to do lots of different things. You might decide, actually, we need a simpler interface for doing things. Let's build that in a low-code platform like Power Platform, using the interface back into, we call it SAP for the sake of arguments. That isn't that easy to do in the back end of SAP, but we've actually now created our own front end quite quickly to do this particular task, which might be just simply moving stock from this warehouse to that warehouse and kicking off the process that requires to do that, which might be, you know, there might be some write-offs involved, there might be some stock movements, whatever else your back-end process looks like that might not be handled eloquently by a human going through all the screens, but you could actually orchestrate the whole thing. So it's those kind of things. Or if, you know, you're down to a certain level in raw materials, if this happens, kick off a process that creates the PO or the PR and then orders the product.
Interesting. Okay. What's the most, you're looking at retail or FMCG, either of the two, what's the most exciting thing that you're seeing happening in terms of the AI and automation? Is there anything that's really kind of jumping out as, you know?
It's probably the consumer side. So I've got to be careful. I kind of want to talk about something, but I'm not allowed. So I'll talk around it.
Safe audience.
Yeah, they won't mind. It's just me and you, Dave, right? So yeah, I think what we're going to start seeing is better information to our consumers, the white consumers, not just the consumer of a product that's, you know, of one customer, but all of us as a nation, access to better data to make better decisions on what we decide to buy every day in terms of groceries and things like that. I've seen lots of things happening in spaces like that where we give a lot of information daily around our behavior. We do it through reward systems, through, you know, even Countdown sells it to somebody else, and then people like, you know, Coke and Frucor will buy it off of these other companies to do their FMCG models and all that kind of stuff. But that information is so valuable because that's where people can target stuff through to you. I think unlocking some of that stuff to give us more power as consumers, especially in current economic climates, is one of the most exciting things I've seen this year so far, which you'll hear more about pretty soon, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, it would definitely be good for Amazon to recommend something other than more of the same, or Netflix to recommend stuff that I actually want to watch. It's
Yeah, and
ground to be gained there.
think more locally and think supermarkets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about, in terms of the outlook for the future? I mean, I know we're 2 years down the track from sort of GPT-4 being released, so we're still at a very early stage of this stuff. But, when you think 3 to 5 years down the line and, you pick up your crystal ball to have a look at what's coming down the pipe, what are you excited about? Or where do you think we're going to be in that 3 to 5 year time frame?
It's a great question, and I wish I knew. My view, Dave, is it's all around the augmented employee experience, or the agentic era, as people are kind of calling it. So we're going to get to a point where you're just firing stuff through to the agent, which will do a whole bunch of stuff for you, which is probably talking to other agents, and stuff will just happen. And that's here now, to be honest. It's just that we're not probably at the point of ready to turn that kind of level of technology on where it's almost semi-autonomous sort of thing. I think we'll see businesses adopting like true data analytics, using Gen AI insights will be a common thing, because like I think, as I mentioned at the beginning, a lot of these tools were very inaccessible for the majority of Kiwi businesses. We're a nation of small businesses, right? And we wouldn't be able to afford some of these things, but we can now. You're probably paying for it, not realizing it, which is the tragedy around some of this stuff, really, as well. I think we'll see a lot more fine tuning of AI models to specific businesses. So we'll all have our little AI model that we talk to on a daily basis, sitting in your Teams or your whatever productivity suite you're using, that you'll use on a daily basis to do lots of different things for you, booking meetings, booking leave, all that kind of thing. And that's happening now. And then my other big bet is probably around, and this isn't new either, but no one's really using it, is process mining. Actually mapping your processes through a system to really see where the inefficiencies are, so that you really know where to focus on some of these things. It's a really common use case we're seeing.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. And when you say sort of true data analytics, what do you mean by that in comparison to what we call conventionally?
Sorry, what I mean there is, a lot of people are pretty good at getting, their Power BI reports or similar, Tableau, whatever, and they've got their operation reporting, or they've got a little bit of data warehousing going on over time, but they're not really doing true analytics where the predictive piece is coming off, and coming off well, and then putting, a large language model over the top to go something like scenario planning. Hey, what if we stopped this line? What if we ran this SKU on that line over there? What if we did this? What if we did that? And actually seeing what the impact of that could do to the curve, sort of thing. So I think we'll start seeing that play out more and more, because it's accessible.
Yeah, absolutely. Talk us through the agentic side a little bit more. I've had heaps of YouTube video recommendation all about agents and this sort of thing. I haven't really dug into them much. I mean, are we talking sort of essentially like a digital employee in some respects, right? Like they'll just run off and do a set of tasks and then come back with the results. Is that a useful way to understand it?
Yeah, pretty much at the core, absolutely. It's almost like think of it like a system of ChatGPTs. So it's not just one. It's a bunch of them, and they're all kind of talking to each other to get to the best answer that you've asked, or the outcome that you need. So that's what they mean by kind of the agentic side of things. It's not just one LLM; it's actually many LLMs together, so large language models that are talking to each other to come up with an answer, or do a process, or whatever it is, sort of thing. And that's kind of where it starts getting really exciting, because you're talking like model to model, and that's the interesting piece. Also,
each with its own set of training data. Is that so they're distinguished by
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because I often kind of equate like an LLM to someone that you meet in the street, that could be a stranger, you don't know anything about them, but they've got a whole bunch of stuff that's happened in their life, and that affects what they think or their view on something. It's the same with an LLM. It's what it's trained on. So if you bring in multiple, it could be quite interesting to see how that plays out. Keen from your own insight, Dave. So what are you guys seeing as an impact, and as it flows in through to recruitment and that kind of thing with AI?
Yeah, from a recruitment point of view, I think it's a really mixed bag right now. I mean, you've broadly got sort of three sets of states of play. You've got organisations that are doing absolutely nothing, and that's probably the vast majority. As you mentioned earlier, New Zealand's kind of a market of small businesses. I think 90% of businesses have less than 10 employees, and the vast majority of those are pretty much sole traders. So for most of those companies, I don't think they've moved particularly far. you've got a large number of companies, I think, that are starting to make forays into this, and then you've got, again, a reasonable group that are, probably your clients, where they're sort of larger enterprise, you're really pushing forward in this. And within that set of organizations, we've definitely seen the creation of new roles this year. So AI lead roles, for example, and then kind of recruiting a group below that. That might be a small team of developers and a couple of business analysts. So there's been an increase in kind of AI skills that are demanded to that extent, but it's by no means huge at this point, because it still feels like it's really early stage. I mean, if you look at any of the adverts that are up on Seek or LinkedIn, you can kind of tell how early stage it is, because the skills that are asked are so generic. So like LLM understanding, or AI / machine learning understanding. Whereas in more mature markets, you see them asking for more specifics around sort of technologies and skill sets. Actually, the bigger requirement we're seeing has been for automation roles, which, as you know, is 15, 20 years old now. But I think many more companies seem to be on that RPA journey and hiring talent for those projects. Obviously, AI can form a part of that, and they're often looking for those skills as a part of it. But as you've touched on, I think the increase in accessibility of tools like the Power Platform has driven pretty significant growth in those job types. I think also companies can sort of more intuitively see what they can get from process automation than they can the black box of AI, which I don't think is as clearly understood. I don't know what your view on that is.
Yeah, I think there's black boxes and there's black boxes, I think, is probably my response to that, because there is like, for example, if you're doing something like, as I mentioned, the bank reconciliation process, yes, you're using a computer vision model, but that's a very box computer vision model that does one thing, many things in that one thing, but it's a very closed piece. That then will go to a fuzzy logic model, which is very closed. Like, there's no real dark arts and that kind of thing. I mean, yes, the deep learning models by nature are black boxes, and you don't know how it got to its answer, because it's just impossible to trace back, sort of thing. So it's horses for courses again, I guess. Like, I often kind of say, who's got the the robot vacuum at home? That's running AI, right? But it's a closed AI model, so that would have taken quite a bit of time to build in big GPUs and all the rest of it. But when you finish, you're left with a little program that's very, very small that can sit on something, because it's done learning. It's just running now, right? So you kind of think about, there's a lot of models out there that are like that are just done for specific things, and don't be afraid to use them.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought of it like that. I think when it comes to jobs, the bigger sort of question on people's mind is, what's going to happen to my job? Am I going to be outsourced or disrupted by AI? I think we've all, to some extent, got this kind of innate fear of replacement by machines. This kind of Terminator with a tie on kind of comes in and subverts our roles. But quite honestly, it's just too hard to know how that's going to go at this point. Certainly in the roles that we work on, which is pretty broad, but it's kind of limited to professional sort of corporate jobs, we're definitely not seeing AI disrupt anything yet. RPA is a different story. I mean, that's been going on for years. I think when I started out in recruitment, there was, I was in accounting and finance nearly 20 years ago, and there was lots of accounts payable roles, huge teams, and EDI changed all that. And line assembly workers for years now has kind of been much fewer demand than there was historically. But there's a few articles you might have seen. This sort of there's the Writers Guild strike in the States last year. Fear of what AI was going to do to that. I saw an article a couple of weeks ago about sort of fashion models up in arms because the demand for them is not as great as it was. If you're going to put an advert together, you're probably going to use an AI generated image rather than get a whole crew together for a day shoot. So that sort of thing, I think, is coming down the line. But in the longer term, I think it's really unclear to see what impact AI is going to have on work. I follow a range of different people and academics of various sorts, and the variance in the views is hugely wide. There was an article a couple of months ago from Darren Acemoglu at MIT saying he thinks AI is only ever going to disrupt up to 5% of jobs, which, okay, pretty low, versus some people who think at some point we're never going to need to work ever again. Which on Sunday sounds great, but for the future of humanity, I'm not sure that's where we want to be. I mean, it's such a big gulf. My own kind of take on it is, change is definitely coming, but I think we all need to do more just to get ahead of the curve on AI. Whether you're worried about its impact on your job or not, there's such a huge opportunity here to at least remove the routine and the mundane part of jobs. I mean, that's certainly going to sort of stave off the risk of disruption by thinking about what can be done with that productivity gain. I think it's so easy for us to just kind of think, oh, I've got this time back, but not actually think consciously about what can be done to use that time. And a lot of that is around kind of thinking about what the higher order, sort of more valuable, value-adding use of that time can be. Developing, sharpening skills. I mean, you can work on your ability and your team's ability to think more strategically, more creatively. I mean, we can all develop better interpersonal skills and communication skills, decision-making skills as well. And not least, I mean, thinking about how you're going to hire for those skills, because our evaluation of what we need and how we actually appraise whether people could bring that to you is definitely going to change. So there's a whole world, I think, of things I think that's going to change ahead of us. But yeah, just a few top line thoughts.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree. I think we've got a bigger problem in New Zealand anyway, and we need to kind of really start at the beginning. I mean, I know that things like reading recovery have been canned, unfortunately, and stuff like that. So there's the AI literacy needs to start really, really early on for the next generation, because it's like anything else, right? When the first wave of digital disruption, our order takers became order makers. So and because you're using technology in a different way, so it's the same kind of thing. It's like in the lines as well. Instead of being a line operator, you become a machine operator effectively, and you're running a whole process and stuff like that. But that requires education, requires training and stuff like that. So I think there's opportunity there as well. It just needs to be encouraged, I think, is probably the word, to ensure that it's done the right way and people are given a chance.
Totally. Well, I mean, I think a massive area we could all gain some ground on is just working on our ability to communicate with AI models. It's AI's ability to reason and help with decision making is going to get to a point where it's absolutely exceptional. But if we can't convey the sort of the nuance and subtlety of a problem and all the variables around it, the constraint becomes us and our ability to communicate. So there's a huge amount of work we can do actually to leverage this technology in a better way.
100%. Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Interesting. So, look, I'm keen to move into a Q&A. We've had a few questions already, but be good to get anybody's thoughts on what they specifics around what they need to know. And we're all in different roles here in different industries and things. So it'd be great to throw any questions in the chat. I'm just having a look through whether there's anything I've missed on here. I think we've pretty much covered everything that's coming down the pipe so far. Any other thoughts on what you're seeing out there, just in terms of sort of day-to-day stuff that's coming down that's sort of exciting and sort of kind of getting you out of bed in the morning?
Yeah, it's pretty easy to go to bed at the minute, to be honest. It's quite an exciting time. I think we hear different things every day, to be honest, Dave, which is awesome. I think the best ideas are actually coming from the people who are embedded in their own business and know their value chain in and out, and they just know, actually, if we could do this and this, that's such a great use case. I think probably one thing that we find is people kind of come to us a lot saying, give us the use cases that we can apply to our business, and you can do that to a certain extent. But if you like, the real value comes from the people that actually are in there, and they give you those little nuggets, sort of thing. Like that SEO one I was telling you about earlier on was an example of that. It was like, oh no, we don't need to do that because we're a premium product. But actually, if we did it like this, that would be useful. It was like, that's bloody good.
Yeah.
So you get these kind of things all, and that's why I love my job, to be honest, because you're talking to people all day, every day about this stuff, which is awesome.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah. There's a bit of a sort of a chicken or the egg in some ways, right? We can all kind of think about how we can make our jobs easier, but without the understanding of how the technology works and what the potential is, it's difficult to sort of think about it. So, it's useful for teams just to sort of sit down and think, look, if we can organize things differently, look, how would we think about doing that? With the example of just reading this out, with the example of the vacuum robot model you used, is there actually a bank or pool of models we can find online and start mapping what can be used easily in our organization?
There is a lot of models available easily. It's probably the harder part. like I'll give you an example. Like one of the more readily available models is the Facebook model that you can absolutely use, which is great for things like computer vision if you're doing anything in large data and stuff like that. But there are like so many models out there that you'll kind of get turned away from it quite quickly. I would probably say there's a lot to consume. I would probably suggest you can look at your own I guess architecture. So your productivity suite is probably a good place to start. And then understanding, like if you're in Office 365, for example, have a look at AI Builder and see what's in there. The challenge will be, of course, it's very technology based. So it'll be computer vision and it'll be, model for this, model for this, model for this, so on and so forth, which you may not be able to easily equate to, well, actually we can use that for this sort of thing. So a better way, and it depends on your role, by the way. So I'm probably assuming that you're not in IT, so maybe I shouldn't, but another way might be to think about the use cases where you have internally, if we did this, and this, these are the high value things that we could do because it saves this amount of hours. And then therefore, how would we do that? And then we can help you out with that kind of thing.
Brilliant. Okay. Just talking of AI, Janine Dodd in the chat has put an AI summary there, taking all the key takeaways from the meeting. So yeah, great use of the technology.
I'm surprised you understood my Irish accent, to be honest, Dave.
And mine to one extent. There you go. Well, look, fantastic. There's no other questions coming through. There's a couple of thank yous on there, and on that note, thanks Gavin for everything you shared. It's a huge amount of value there and a lot of takeaways. So awesome to have you on board. And we've been using Kōwhai AI at Convergence, and nothing but huge praise for you guys and the way that you go about working with us. So thoroughly recommend everybody, if you haven't chosen an AI partner yet, or even if you have, then give Gavin and Nick a call and have a chat with them.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate the questions and comments and the interaction. Really do. Thank you.
Likewise. All right. Have great days, and thanks for joining us.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.